Well, this is it. The finale of Season 1 of Doctor Who. Let's get into it. Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Kevin, I am a geek. You're watching Kevin the Geek, and this is my review. My new Doctor Who review of the two-part story, Bad Wolf and the Parting of the Ways. This is the final episode that, to this point, features Christopher Eccleston as the Ninth Doctor. As we all know, I review these with 10 categories, each one getting a score out of 10 to give an overall score out of 100. Let's get started. So, we're going to start off with the story, and this is one of those two-part stories where it feels like I should almost do a review of each episode individually, because they're so different from each other. You have episode 1, Bad Wolf. There you have Rose, the Doctor, and Jack get plucked out of the TARDIS and transmatted onto, well, some sort of space station. And they end up in a futuristic version of early 2000s game shows. Which, first of all, I will say feels quite cheap. And kind of outdated now that you kind of watch them back. I mean, they're also saying that, weirdly, The Weakest Link seems to have made a bit of a comeback lately, and apparently Big Brother is going to get revived soon, so maybe it's not quite as out of date. But the overall kind of thing, it does, you know, it is the same with anything. When you put in pop culture, some things do appear a little bit dated. And that's kind of how it feels a little bit, you know, rewatching this episode nearly 20 years later. But what they did with those games was really good. Maybe the Big Brother one a little bit less so, because there wasn't so much you could really do with that. At least with the one with The Weakest Link, it was very much that you have the, you have the music, you've got the kind of lighting, you have the actual podiums. Obviously, it was BBC property, so they can easily just go to a studio and do those same stuff. It was very easy to do. And I love the android aspect of it. That does make me chuckle even now. You know, the fact that it's Anne Robinson, who you could argue maybe could come across as a bit of a robot at times. But then you get into the crux of the matter. And they don't just get evicted or lose the game or whatever. They get murdered. They literally get disintegrated as part of the game. And straight away you feel a sense of nervousness as you're going through it. I wonder how it would have been with the one that Jack was in. Because that seemed a very different thing. Especially when you later learn what the situation was about. That they get transmatted onto a spaceship rather than actually disintegrated, which is what it initially appears. So the whole idea that they're going to cut off his head and, what was it, sew his knees to his chest or whatever it was, that doesn't quite work once you learn the later kind of concept, if you like. But then, of course, it all kicks up into gear. The master plans behind it all. The Daleks. And had it not been for Dalek, they could have come across as... it could have been quite awkward. You wouldn't have believed, I think, quite to an extent. As a new viewer, if you had never seen the episode of Dalek, and this was your first introduction for the Daleks, you'd be thinking, why is it such a big deal? But you've seen it. You know how ruthless they are, and cold-blooded and murderous and everything. So when the Doctor says that there's about 500,000 of them, and you think back how difficult it was to stop one, you know you're in for a tough ride. So, as an overall story, I really liked it. Yes, there were, some issues here and there, but for the most part, it was a good story. And a good regeneration story as well. That's what you have to take into consideration. So the story's getting 7 marks out of 10. Now, the Doctor in this episode, first episode for a good 3/4 of the episode Bad Wolf, he's just kind of there. He's doing his usual stuff. He's doing a bit of investigating. Not a lot you can really say. Then you think that Rose has been killed. And that's a really shocking moment. And as an audience, you really do think they have literally killed her off. And so you feel the anguish of Jack, but particularly the Doctor. And how he's so stunned, he's pretty much mute. And then, for one brief shining moment, she's alive. He realises she is still alive. There's still a chance to maybe save her. But that moment of jubilation is wiped away once he realises who he's fighting. The Daleks. And I love the kind of heroic stand he takes at the end of Bad Wolf, when the Daleks is basically saying, give yourself up. But he's so defiant. And he just says, no. No. I'm going to rescue her, and I'm going to kill every single one of you. Oh, that was a strong moment. A real strong moment there. The next episode is where it really kicks up into gear for the Doctor. And you have the situation... where he goes on. He sees this Emperor. So it's now not just Daleks. It is the Emperor of the Daleks. Someone who he has basically seen in the Time War. Which shakes him severely. Because it should not be possible that he is there. And you see that sense of kind of, as the saying goes, if you don't laugh, you cry. And when it's a situation that bad, if you don't laugh, you're literally going to break down in tears. And it feels that way. When the Doctor goes to leave, he's almost like toying with the Daleks and poking fun at them. But the moment the door is closed, that expression changes. And again, he goes back to being really somber. The Doctor was just fantastic through all of this. Even the whole little, sending Rose back to the past to make sure that she's protected, knowing that he's basically going to be stranded there because he ain't going to the TARDIS anymore. He basically knows that if he doesn't get killed, he's basically stuck there. He's stuck as a normal person, and he will just have to live out his life. Just wonderful, wonderful moments with Chris. And maybe because it was his final episode, maybe he was just thinking, you know what? I'm just going to give it everything I got, and I know I've left on a high. And I think he did do that. Not quite full marks, but a really solid performance from Mr. Eccleston there as the Doctor. So 8 marks out of 10. Rose as a character was, again, a little bit stronger than she has been for the majority of the season because she was actually given more to do. First episode again, a little bit lackluster because she's stuck in a ball in a video, not a video game, a game show. But when she basically gets sent back into the past and she's desperately trying to do everything that she can get back, that now becomes quite believable that she would do that. because of everything she's seen, everything that she's seen the Doctor do, everything that he stands for. It's just powerful stuff. And again, I think on balance, the first episode probably drags it down a bit more, and I think was definitely stronger in that second episode. Still a little bit whiny at times for me, but overall, really good performance as an overall thing between the two episodes. So she's going to get 7 marks out of 10. Supporting characters in this one is really split up into 2 halves. You've got Jack and Linda. And then on the other side, you've got Patterson Joseph playing Roderick, the one who Rose was up against in the game show in The Weakest Link. And then the rest of the general staff. And the staff were just there. And the whole thing between the 2 main ones, who I can't remember their names, but that shows how insignificant they were. The whole thing with it, where they go in, oh yeah, there's all this flirty banter between them. It's like, oh yeah, when this is all over, shall we go and get a drink and everything? Then she gets killed, and then he just pops up and goes, in some sort of grief-stricken moment. I didn't buy it because we've not seen anything enough to make us feel that with them. So that was a bit let down. Jack was great, as he always is. He had his fun stuff, his flirty stuff, but then his real serious stuff. And it is very much a Jack thing to be going out in a blaze of glory, literally last man standing, trying to stop the Daleks, knowing that it's basically him against 250, about 500,000 Daleks. So, wonderful stuff there from Jack. Roderick annoys me. He does a really good job of annoying me, and I think that's the way he was purposely written, is to be a bit annoying and self-indulgent and everything, which in the world that you're living in, I buy that as a character. That doesn't mean I have to like it, though. The fact that I understand what they're going with it. I don't like those kind of characters. And then Linda. Sweet little Linda. Linda with a Y. For one moment, when I first watched this, I really thought Rose was dead and Linda is going to be the new companion. No, never works out that way, does it? I really wish we got to see more Linda, because I thought she was a lovely character. And I would have loved to have seen more stuff with her. But it's not meant to be, unfortunately, in this situation. So, mixed bag with a lot of these supporting characters. So, overall, I'm going to go average and 6 out of 10. Now, the villains of the piece, the Daleks. In this episode, they don't do a lot. Daleks were more effective in Dalek. But in this one, it's just more, you're supposed to understand the threats that they're facing. They don't really do much. I have to give huge props to Nick Briggs, who does the voice of the Daleks. He obviously, any person could just literally get a voice modulator, tune it to whatever frequency it is to get the voice of the Daleks and speak like Daleks. But he put so much personality into not just the Daleks as a whole. Like, he will identify just slightly different nuances from Dalek and Dalek to make them still at least feel slightly unique and slightly individual. But the real prop has to go for the Emperor. The way that it speaks is very different. Very grandiose and important, and has built himself up and built up his ego. And I really sense that, particularly from the voice. And like I said, Nick Briggs deserves a fantastic commendation for every single bit that he's ever done with the Daleks. Because that's not easy. because you are constantly having to try and do something slightly different. So props to him. So the Daleks were good in what they needed to do. However, they were still a little bit, not quite at top level, because they needed to do more, I think, to get those top marks. But a good job nonetheless. 7 out of 10. Oh, the music. The music in this episode is now where Murray Gold is finding his form, and that track for the whole Dalek fleet, the whole orchestral sound of those choirs. You've got all these wonderful different instruments. They're just coming together to make this pure sound of terror and wonder and dread. And you now really associate it every time you hear that piece of music. It is just fantastic. Still the odd moment, just that little off. But for the most part, every single emotion that you want to feel, regardless of whatever scene you are watching, whether it's the regeneration, whether it is Rose doing the whole Bad Wolf thing, or the sound of the Daleks and everything, all the way through, it hits a nail 9 times out of 10 on the head. And that's my score. 9 marks out of 10. Finally, the special effects are getting really good. It's starting to get a lot better, particularly on the close-ups. And I love the fact that the Emperor Dalek, the actual Dalek itself, is actually the same prop that was used in Dalek. Although they did eventually have to rebuild it for later series because they put it in water. So maybe that was a slightly, less good choice in that regard. But overall, the special effects look good. But my biggest commendation has to go to the regeneration. The regeneration, in my opinion, from Eccleston into Tennant, so far, the actual effect of that regeneration is still the best of new Doctor Who, and arguably classic Who as well. That deserves huge props. My only downside would be the massive, humongous bright light that's coming from behind the Doctor and behind Rose when it's the whole Heart of the TARDIS thing. That's the only thing. It's just a bit too bright for me. I get what they're going for, but it's just too bright. So 9 marks out of 10. The dialogue in this episode is where we're starting to find that form, and Russell D. Davies is starting to get the flow of how it should all work. Definitely the start of the series, you're just finding your feet a little bit. But here we get some really lovely dialogue between, for example, the Doctor and the Emperor Dalek, the Doctor and Rose, her mum and Mickey. All these different things are kind of building up. Yeah, again, still some iffy moments, but for the most part, really good. 7 marks out of 10. Final 2 categories, the costumes and the sets, which, like I've done for the last couple of episodes, I'm kind of bulking them together. Each one gets the same score here. It is reusing a lot of the previous sets, which, as I've said previously, it is a situation that I think a lot of it was budgets, and they were quite limited on what they could do with it. And similar to, for example, like Long Game, the fact that your set's that's 200,000 years in the future, and you're wearing stuff that arguably is, early 2000s kind of wear. Yeah, not great there. So, like I said, there are some things that bump it up a little bit. For example, the design of the Dalek spaceship was really lovely. I really like that, and the design of the Emperor Dalek, I really like that design. But for the most part, a little bit average again, or rather a little bit under average, because of the fact that they're reusing so much. So both the costumes and the set are both getting 4 out of 10. And that's it. That is the final rankings for the final episode of the season 1 of Doctor Who, I can now reveal, have scored 68 points out of 100. Which means it is a B- episode. Was this a good finale? I would say, for the most part, yes, it was. You took all these different stories that have been built up over the course of the previous, sort of 11 episodes and brought them together for a conclusion which felt fitting. And the regeneration itself was a little bit on the short side, but I think that felt right. I don't think anything more, it would have been a little bit too much. And I think it was handled very, very well. But we have now brought David Tennant into the picture, who of course will be coming back next year as part of the 60th anniversaries as not the 10th Doctor or the Meta-Crisis Doctor, but the 14th Doctor. That's going to be interesting. I'll probably do a video on my thoughts on that at some point, once I've kind of got the gist of everything a little bit more. But what are your thoughts for Bad Wolf and Parting of the Ways? Drop a comment down below. Remember, if you're new to the channel, please do consider subscribing. Like the video if you did. So coming up soon, we will be having an overall review of the first season of Doctor Who and comparing it to my rankings that I did pre-watching the series again. But coming up on Christmas Day 2022, I will be doing my first Christmas review, which will be for The Christmas Invasion, the first episode, well, first proper episode, featuring David Tennant. I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you. Goodbye. Have a Merry Christmas.